I mean, this is what makes the Blazers circumstance so fraught, so challenging to me. Like if I were theoretically, if I was trying to get that job, which I'm not, if they want to offer it to me, we could have a discussion. But it's okay. Let's say you want to retool. You want to go in a different direction. And let's say Lillard is separate that like just for now, just for the sake of it. Okay. Now you want to do something different. CJ McCollum owed a lot of money, basically 34 million each of the next 2 years after this season, and he's in his 30s. Robert Covington, pending unrestricted free agent. Nurkic, pending unrestricted free agent. Larry Nance, reasonable contract, but not like a crazy value. And they just gave Norm Powell. I think Norm Powell's contract is looking totally fine. But so what does, like this is something that I think is such an important thing to consider in these circumstances, which is what does the sell-off look like? Are they getting assets for these players? And if so, how does what they get for that help fuel the next great Blazers team? Because they have enough talent that actually tearing it down might be somewhat difficult.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the obvious like elephant in the room here is the idea of Ben Simmons, right? This is the worst defense in the league. Ben Simmons is one of the best defensive players in the NBA. CJ McCollum makes a modicum of sense on the Sixers, but I think he makes less sense than he did at the start of the season due to the emergence of Tyrese Maxey throughout the course of the year. I think that it would cost Portland a substantial number of assets in addition to CJ McCollum to get Ben Simmons. Would you agree with that? Like, I don't think Daryl Morey would take like CJ McCollum and a first round pick for Ben Simmons. Like, I think it would cost CJ McCollum like multiple draft picks, multiple pick swaps, and like a maybe even like another thing for Daryl to accept that, given what his standard has been for accepting a Ben Simmons trade thus far, not necessarily based on what I think fair value is for Ben Simmons.
I think that's reasonable, especially when you consider the age part of this equation, that CJ, this is his age 30 season, and Simmons is significantly younger than that. And so the idea being that future years might be worse, and not necessarily worse than CJ has been so far, but just, the expectation is that he is prime and then post prime. And so having CJ on the Sixers would help them more than Ben Simmons has so far this year, to be sure. But Morey I don't think he's negotiating this as just like, will this make the Sixers better? It's, we only have one opportunity to potentially trade Ben Simmons, and Joel Embiid is an important part of our present and our future. So what can we do there? So I think that you're right on the substance, and it's possible that if somebody like Nasir Little could end up being an important part of that equation, just because he could help out the Sixers depth. And he's not, I don't think he's going to be like a starting closing five guy for the Sixers in the near term, but he can help. And it'll also be interesting because, like, theoretically, if they wanted to go that direction, Norm Powell would help this iteration of the Sixers too. But I struggle with the idea, to use a kind of an abstract analogy, money is about the double coincidence of wants, which is like in a barter system. One of the challenges is that you have to each assess how much the other person's things are worth. And so that's why you have money, is so that you can sell something and then you can use money to exchange for something else. And that's the hard part here, is just, can these two sides in a theoretical trade agree on what these two principal players are worth for each other?
Yeah, and I don't know that will happen. Like, I'm trying to find the landing spot for CJ if it's not Philadelphia, if they do decide to make a move there. It's kind of tricky, to be honest. Like, I don't know that there is a single spot where I'm like, oh my God, like this is the move. Like, Miami doesn't really have the matching contracts to make a deal like that work. I mean, like, the one that I've been like trying to sneaky figure out is like, is there a chance that like you could see Washington do something like that? Like maybe they decide that they want to make a move, and that they have this Kyle Kuzma deal, they have Kentavious Caldwell Pope, they have the contracts that you can match, and then a few interesting assets, and maybe they decide they want to try and make a run toward like the Eastern Conference Finals. I'm not saying that'd be like a rational move on Washington's part in terms of what we think. I'm saying, like, is there a chance that Washington could think, hey, maybe we look at CJ McCollum as a guy that makes sense for us?
That's a possibility. Another one that I've been thinking about a little bit, especially when they've exceeded expectations so far, is Cleveland, where
Yeah, I've been thinking about that too. That's interesting.
because then you pair him with Garland. It's a mitigation possibility with Sexton, who may or may not theoretically be included in that trade. I think that the Blazers would be interested just because he's a player that you can have match rights on. And I think those match rights would be useful for Colin Sexton coming off of this injury. But and Rubio would be salary ballast there. I mean, depending on how you want to structure it, you could even this could be finally the opportunity for Kevin Love to return home. He grew up in Lake Oswego, but again, it's hard to figure out, kind of get all the moving pieces right there. I think there's kind of a concept of it. Another one that I've wondered about, but I also think has some of these same logistical challenges, is Indiana, where having another capable creator would, and I think CJ's meaningfully better than Karis LeVert, would get there. But A, that move is probably going to make the Pacers more expensive. And B, like we talked about the difficulty of a Simmons McCollum swap, figuring out who in the world makes sense on the Pacers for this Blazers team is in some ways even more challenging.
Yeah, if I'm the Pacers, I'm not going out and acquiring like a 30s shot creating guard. Like, I'm trying to maybe make some moves toward the future, but I don't know that Rick Carlisle and the people in charge there tend to think that way. The Cleveland one is interesting because you can essentially do like Ricky Rubio, Chetty Osman, and Colin Sexton for CJ McCollum, and that seems non-disastrous to me. Like that seems like a deal that you can wrap your head around making sense. Like Ricky Rubio's been really good this year. His contract being an expiring deal, it does set you up pretty well for the future. Colin Sexton, obviously, like a pretty real asset. Like I'm higher on Colin than what I think most people are. Has a chance, I think, to be like a perpetual 20 to 25 point per game scorer. And then Chetty Osman's just kind of a guy. Like, I think he's a back end of the rotation guy.
He's having a good year, but that, the most likely outcome is that he ends up being, like a rotation player who doesn't start.
Yeah, I mean, look, like Chetty right now is making shots like at a pretty substantial clip. I know he's shooting like 40, 41, something like that from three. Like he's part of it is that he's just making threes at a high volume for the first time in his career. If you think that's going to continue, then no, you shouldn't necessarily look to involve him in a deal like this. But we have a long sample of Chetty being a bit inconsistent from distance, so we will see how long that lasts. I don't know. That's a deal that is interesting to me, to be honest. Is Cleveland bringing CJ McCollum home? And not even having to involve Kevin Love if you're the Portland Trailblazers. That's actually a sensible move, I think, across the board. I don't think they're going to do that, though. Like, I think the moves are almost certainly going to be like, okay, we need to shake up the starting lineup. Let's move like Robert Covington's expiring deal or Yusuf Nurkic's expiring deal. I don't know where to move Nurkic. Like that's kind of what I'm struggling with. Like, I've been looking. The center position is just loaded kind of across the NBA. Most teams have at least a guy that they think can be league average or at least is league average as a starter. And I think you're a little bit higher on Nurkic than I am, if I remember correctly. Right, Danny?
Probably a little bit, but not dramatically so.
Yeah. And I just like, I think that like if Toronto wants to try and make a run toward the playoffs, maybe like that's a spot that could make sense. But again, like I don't know what they would be willing to send back. Is there a landing spot for Nurkic that you can like point to and you're like that's the one? Because I have one in my back pocket that is at least 10% interesting, but I'd like to hear yours first.
The first thought that I had is Charlotte. I mean,
yeah,
I was very frustrated that they ended up, with having a year where they had real cap space and walking out with Mason Plumlee because he's just not good enough. And they're dealing right now with a bunch of guys in the protocol. So they have other problems at the plate. And James Borrego, I think last year justifiably received a lot of credit for kind of making it work defensively. I would say throwing a lot of junk out there, and I mean that in a positive way for him because they just didn't have a lot of defensive talent.
Yeah.
And so Nurkic, sort of similar in a way to what we've said before with the Blazers, is that it might be a low ceiling thing, but at least they could raise their defensive floor, and he could be a useful role man for them, which could be good for them. One of the challenges, and this is going to be true of any potential Nurkic trade, is he's a pending unrestricted free agent. Maybe you could come to some sort of either whether it's an actual extension or an understanding of what he's looking for in the offseason. Those
Yeah.
sorts of things happen all the time, including, I would guess, with the Blazers with Norman Powell back when they acquired him in that trade for Gary Trent.
You
And
know, I'll be honest, like I don't know that I would see Nurkic as anything else other than a rental if I was one of these teams.
but so then for the Blazers, then it gets challenging because what team is going to give you anything of value for a rental center? Like that's it. It's
So
just
with Charlotte, like, is there a chance that you can do something like Mason Plumlee? Because one thing that Chauncey Billups has stated is like, our bench is giving us more energy than our starters. It's a significant problem. Mason Plumlee has been with guys like Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum before. He's played with them. It's gone pretty well. You could maybe make a case that Mason Plumlee, I don't want to say he'd be an upgrade on Yusuf Nurkic because I don't think he would be, but that just the change of the energy in the starting lineup maybe could not be as big of a drop off as what you would think between the two of those guys. And then you go out and you get something like, I don't know, like I don't think that the Hornets are moving Kai Jones in that deal for Nurkic, but like, could you get Nick Richards? Could you get, Jalen McDaniels in that deal? Something like that. Jalen McDaniels has been like pretty okay in the minutes I've seen him play. Maybe it's something like that.
yeah, maybe. I mean, it's if and this is the idea of like, basically what would a sell-off look like, and we could run into similar problems with Robert Covington. Not that he is a bad player, but who is going to bend over backwards for him in the way that both Neil O'Shea and Daryl Morey have in the past. Like he's a
Yeah.
very talented player, and forwards are more valuable than centers. We're getting into that conversation, but it's hard. Like I mean, and part of this is also pending free agency can be a selling point because okay, we could figure out it's a future. You can think about that, but also it's the Covington and Nurkic, I would say, are two of the players with murkier valuation estimates. So, do you want to get into the circumstance of giving up this player, having them help you, then paying them a lot for what are probably post prime years? Maybe. I mean, if that could be a good problem for you to have if they did so well that you want to retain him. But Covington, that next year will be his age 32 season. For Nurkic, he'll be 28. But you think about all the injuries that he's had, it's a challenge.
The one that was in my back pocket for Nurkic was the Lakers. He's a clutch client. They obviously could potentially use a center to try and ease the burden on Anthony Davis. I know that they've said recently that Anthony Davis is going to play a little bit more center moving forward, but I think that they would probably prefer not to do that. They have that Kendrick Nunn $5 million deal that becomes tradable on December 15th. I obviously don't think they would give up Talen Horton-Tucker for Yusuf Nurkic necessarily on an expiring deal, but could you do something like Kendrick Nunn, Dwight Howard, and like a pick or something like that? Or it'd have to be like you'd have to throw in a third guy as well.
Yeah, the Lakers have so little salary ballast. It's
hard.
It's one of the underrated parts of their story is that when you have three guys making over 35 million and then one guy making between basically 5 and 35, which is Talen Horton-Tucker, hard to make trades work. They're more of a buyout destination than a trade team.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Unless they want to move Tucker. Which I don't know that they should necessarily unless they're getting back someone who's like really, really interesting. Yeah, and then Covington is hard. Covington, I think, is probably the easiest to move in many respects just because he is a true wing that is pretty solid defensively. Like if you're like, I would be really interested to see him in Miami to be
Oh
honest.
boy.
Like if you could make that work, like that would be really fun. But again, Miami's another one of these teams that just doesn't really have like the salary matching to make a move like that make sense. Um, it's hard for me to see how that would work. Like I've been trying to find a Covington spot, and again, like you said, because so many of these teams have uh, trickier, let's say, salary cap situations, it's a little bit difficult to like really find the team. Like I was thinking, like I wonder if the Knicks, given how much defensive difficulty they've had at times this year, would have some interest.
I was trying to figure out a way to so something that I know, or at least there's pretty clear indicators out there that Phoenix would like to offload some of their 22, 23 salary. If they could
Yeah.
do something involving Crowder and Covington, where they potentially lose, they would have the ability to retain Covington if everything goes super duper well, but could also move in a different direction. That would be really interesting.
You know, I get that. I don't really love that for Phoenix because I understand the idea of the long-term value being really important for them. But Crowder and his on ball, he's a lot better on ball than what
True.
Robert Covington is in the playoffs. And I feel like he's a much more valuable playoff player because of that. Because they're both a bit streaky in terms of being 3-point shooters. I just wonder if Robert Covington would be a bit of a liability for them in the playoffs in a way that Crowder isn't. But for Portland, I think that would actually make some sense given what Chauncey Billups was saying last night about like we need to change the energy in the starting lineup. I mean, infusing Jay Crowder into the starting lineup would obviously change the energy, I would think.
Yeah, and with Covington, I mean, the he makes sense a lot of places, but it's who's going to bend over backwards to bring him in, and that's a real
Yeah.
challenge to kind of piece that together. And for Portland's perspective, is it worth it to move him if the return is that tepid? And so
Yeah.
there will be basically there's going to be movement on one side or the other, but we just don't know which one it is. And that's also the nature of trade negotiations often don't make it into the public eye. And so I could imagine the Blazers being interested once they have a new decision maker installed in some of these consequences. But it's not an all or nothing proposition for the Blazers, but it is a circumstance where going, a half measure actually, unless the trades are really good in their specific things, leads to a worse outcome than either of the others because then
Yeah, I agree.
you're frustrating Lillard, you're doing that. So you kind of have to treat these as connected, but also understanding that you need to make sure that the individual pieces make sense. So if you don't have strong enough offers on CJ, then you're probably not going to make a CJ trade, and then theoretically that makes a Nurkic or a Covington deal less palatable.
And the problem with all of this is that say that you do decide to go future centric with some of these deals, Damian Lillard's probably not happy with that. And then you
Correct.
probably end up losing Dame. So you can't really go future centric with these deals. You have to go almost just like shake up deals more than anything. Like that's more what I'm kind of wondering. Like, is there a shake up deal for Portland that could just like change the energy of their situation? More than like them going out and trying to substantially change their direction, because I think a deal like that probably happens in the summer, and frankly I think it probably involves Damian Lillard making a choice that Portland fans may not be happy with. But that's the only way the direction substantively changes, is if Damian Lillard says, okay, send me to what Stephen A. Smith has continued to say is his, favored destination, the New York Knicks, right? Like, send me to Philadelphia, send me to X, Y, and Z. Otherwise, like you're still trying to win because you have Damian Lillard, and it's
Right.
hard to
And
formulate deals when that's the case.
it is. And the other reason that would probably push things is that typically, historically, moves involving star players, it's stars for younger players and draft picks. And so then
Yeah.
then the bottom comes out enough that you can get And, you and I could think about this in a variety of them. One of them is like the Anthony Davis trade, or even going back to the Chris Paul trade, which led to the I believe they were the Hornets then getting EDE, which is, if you really want to build the next great Blazers team, meaning not involving their current guys, it's almost definitely going to involve at some point being bad enough to get some real draft equity. And
Yeah.
honestly, that's not going to happen when Damian Lillard is available. He's too good. Even in this limited form, Damian Lillard right now, 53% true shooting on 28 usage. And he's still a great enough player that you're not going to be that level of team.
My bet here is that the Blazers do make some sort of shakeup trade, but that they do not substantively change the direction of the organization, and that they continue to try and win with Damian Lillard throughout the course of this season, and then maybe make a move next season, or in the off season. I'm sorry. If it's decided that that's the route